Good morning. So good to see everybody today. I also want to echo what Brother Mike said in the announcements. I want to appreciate each one that came yesterday and helped with the work day. I've talked to several of you, and I think all of us are struggling with a little bit of soreness today. I don't think many of us are used to working that hard for that long. But we were able to get a lot done yesterday, and I think everyone will be very pleased with this project in the basement once everything gets finished. It's already looking so much better. And as I mentioned, we have a great facility here. We've got a lot of room, a lot of space that's not been utilized, and we're just looking forward to being able to fix some things up and have more space that we're able to use and to be more effective in using what we have. And so, as mentioned, we are looking at sometime in the near future trying to get together again and finish up some other things. We will send out a one-call message as well. We will announce that in our services once we determine what day we're going to try to get together and do that. And we hope that many of you are able to come. As we said, even if you can only come and help for 30 minutes or an hour, that help is beneficial. Folks, we had some that came and stayed all day long yesterday, from 8 o'clock till about 4 o'clock, and just really worked hard. We had others who weren't able to come and stay that long, but we still appreciate all the help that was put forth yesterday. We appreciate that so much. Also, as Mike said, tonight is our question and answer night. I don't know what it is. For the last 2 or 3 months, it seems like every month on question and answer night, something comes up and we're not able to have evening service. We have some kind of a storm come in, something comes up, we have a guest speaker come. So I don't know if it's just the questions that I have prepared for this time, if we're not supposed to look at those, I don't know. But we are looking forward to having the question and answer night tonight. I, for one, have missed it. And I hope that many of you are able to be here tonight and join in that study. And as always, if you have questions that you would like to have addressed on the question and answer night, please feel free to submit those to me. Sometimes we get several databased there, and it takes a few months to get through all of them, but that's fine. But if you have any questions that you would like to have addressed, please feel free to get those submitted. Last night, before going to bed, I told Christy and the kids that I was going to start my sermon in a little bit of a unique way today. I said that I was going to start the sermon this way. What do Robin Hood, Zorro, and Batman all have in common? Well, these figures are seen as heroes. They are seen as strong figures who stand up for those who are weak, those who are poor, those who are defenseless. We go back to our younger days and we think about Robin Hood and how he would rob from the rich and give to the poor in order to relieve some of the oppression that they were suffering at the hands of Prince John and his Sheriff of Nottingham. We think about Zorro and Zorro avenging those helpless residents of California during the days of Spanish colonization when they were being oppressed by that Bandito Diego. We think about Batman and how he was always coming to the aid of those defenseless residents of Gotham City. Especially when we're young, folks, we have a fascination with those kind of figures, don't we? We identify with them, we're drawn to them because of those strong characteristics, those strong, good traits that they set forth. We look to these types of individuals as role models. We try to pattern our lives after what we see in them. And we think back, in the best moments of life, that's what we want to be. We want to be that type of hero who is always there to provide for those who are weak. And in those hard times of life, we think back and we see that we failed to live up to that standard. But this idea of the strong standing up for the weak, it's not just a trait that we see displayed in secular sources. It's not something that we see simply from the standpoint of these of fictional heroes or the superheroes that we see portrayed today. We find that this is an honorable and biblical position to take. We find a wonderful example of this in the Old Testament. And it takes place at a location known as Brook Besor. Now, Brook Besor is not a place that is as well known or as historically significant as, say, the Jordan River or Jerusalem or Rome or the Red Sea. But even though this place is a location of somewhat obscurity, we find that it was a key location due to two events that took place at this locale. And one of those events we're going to discuss this morning. And we're going to look at some of the lessons that we can glean from an account that took place at Brook Besor during the life of King David. And from this account, I think we're going to see a great example as well as some pointers, some tips that we can look at in observing this trait of the strong watching out for, protecting, and caring for those who are weak. As we get into our lesson, let's notice again our lesson text, which Brother David shared with us, there from 1 Samuel 30, verses 21 through 25. And David came to the 200 men, which were so faint that they could not follow David, whom they had made also to abide at the brook Besor. And they went forth to meet David, and to meet the people that were with him. And when David came near to the people, he saluted them. Then answered all the wicked men and the men of Belial, of those who had gone with David, and said, because they went not with us, we will not give them aught of the spoil that we have recovered, save to every man his wife and his children, that they may lead them away and depart. Then said David, ye shall not do so, my brethren. With that which the Lord hath given us, who hath preserved us, and delivered the company that came against us into our hand. For who will hearken unto you in this matter? But as his part is that goeth down to the battle, so shall his part be that tarrieth by the stuff. They shall part alike. And it was so from that day forward, and he made it a statute and an ordinance for Israel unto this day. So we go back into the chapters immediately prior to this. And in 1 Samuel 27 through 29, we find that David and his army, which consisted of 600 men, they've been out, they've been traveling abroad, they've been engaging in battle with a number of different people. Well, when they come back to their home base at a place known as Ziklag, they find that the Amalekites have come in, have laid siege to the city, and they have carried away their wives and their children. Among those were two of David's wives, a woman by the name of Ahinoam and Abigail. Now, this passage is one that is often cited as a contradiction in the Bible. And the reason why it's cited as such is because if we go back to 1 Samuel 15, we see in verses 4 through 9 where God had instructed King Saul to go and to utterly destroy the Amalekites. He was told that he was to go and he was to destroy men, women, children, cattle, sheep, camels, and donkeys. So Saul took with him 200,000 foot soldiers. They went and they laid siege to the Amalekites, and the text tells us that they took only one. They took Agag, the king of Amalek, and everyone else, all of his people, he destroyed with the sword. So the question is this: if it is true that in 1 Samuel chapter 15, Saul went in and destroyed all of the Amalekites with the exception of the king of Amalek, then how were there still Amalekites around in 1 Samuel 30 to destroy Ziklag and carry away the wives and children of David's men? So you can see where people would look at this just on the surface and they would say, that sounds like a contradiction. Because here, just a couple of years prior, we see a reference stating that all but one of that nation had been destroyed. But now we see that they had grown in strength to the point that they were able to come in and carry away all of these people, destroy this city. This just goes to prove the Bible's not true. Well, the answer to this charge lies in the Hebrew meaning of the term that's translated nation or people in these passages. Oftentimes, this Hebrew term would be used to refer to just a portion of that nationality or a portion of that people. And more often than not, it was a term that would be used to refer to the military figures of that nation and their families. And so, with that in mind, we see this usage of this term in 1 Samuel 15 and verse 4 in reference to Saul and his army. And we also see it in 1 Samuel 15 and verse 20 in reference to the Amalekites. And so what we must understand that by the usage of this term, what Saul did was not go in and destroy the entire nation, every living soul that was a part of Amalekite lineage. But what that is saying is he went in and he destroyed the entire military of Amalek. All of those soldiers, all of their families, all of the flocks that would be taken along with the military, all of those things were destroyed. The only one of that number that was allowed to remain alive was the king. He was taken back as one of the spoils of battle. And so by looking at this, we can come to the conclusion that this was not the entire nation being destroyed. And I would even say that more than likely it was not even the entire army that was being destroyed, because many of these nations, as we are familiar with our United States military, they would have different detachments of military that would be serving in different areas. And so it's possible that one of the armies of Amalek was completely destroyed by Saul, but there were other armies of Amalek that were serving in other places. But nevertheless, that is an explanation as to why there were still Amalekites around at this point. Now, we can better understand this as well when we think about instances from more modern history. We think about back during the American Revolution. We think about Paul Revere's Midnight Ride. And when he rode along screaming out, "The British are coming," did he mean the entire British nation was coming? No, he meant the British military was coming. Also, many times in war, the United States military, they're simply referred to as the Americans. Does that mean that they're referring to every American? No, they're referring just to that military force. And so this is not a contradiction in the Bible. So let's get back to David and his men. They've been out, they've been in battle, they come back to Ziklag, and as you can imagine, you try to put yourself in their shoes, they show up in that place expecting a time of respite, expecting to see their wives, to see their children. They show up and they find the city destroyed. They get to looking around, they don't find any dead bodies, so they know that they've all been carried away. Well, the text says that they began to cry out. They began to grieve. And they did this until they could grieve no more. They wore themselves out physically with the grief that they were enduring. But suddenly that grief changed over to anger. Someone had to be held accountable. Someone had to face the blame. And so they began to place that blame upon David. Many of them even saying that they needed to put David to death. They were taking up stones, ready to stone David to death. So knowing that something had to be done and had to be done quick, David appealed to the Lord for guidance. He went to God and asked God what he needed to do in order to rectify this situation and to restore the morale of his men. God told David, you take these men, you take these 600 men, you pursue the Amalekites. You destroy them, and you will receive back every single one of your family members unhurt. Well, immediately they leave out in hot pursuit. They travel a distance of about 15 miles, and they arrive at a place known as Brook Besor. Well, when they arrive at Brook Besor, there are 200 of David's men that are so exhausted, just physically tired. In fact, the Hebrew word that's used here in this verse is the term that they would describe a dead body. So, as we would say today, these men were dead tired. They were exhausted. They couldn't go on any further. And so David tells those men, you 200 men, you stay back. We're going to leave all of the supplies. We're going to leave everything with you. And we're going to press on with these 400. And so those 200 men are left at Brook Besor. Now, something to keep in mind. Remember, these were men who had been out probably for months at this point, traveling around, engaging in battle after battle after battle. They arrive home expecting a time of rest and relaxation, only to find that their families are gone. Their city is destroyed. And over the next 24-hour period, they are in a period of intense mourning. There's no rest. There's no relaxation taking place whatsoever. And then immediately, most people say that from the time they arrived back at Ziklag to the time that they left again was less than 24 hours. And they're on foot. They travel 15 miles. And some of these men, they just can't go on any further. They're exhausted, physically and emotionally exhausted. Well, David and the other 400, they continue on. When they finally come upon the Amalekites, they come across a party taking place. They're celebrating, they're eating, and they're drinking, and they're dancing. They're using the spoils that they had stolen from Ziklag. They didn't have a care in the world. Seemingly, they weren't worried about an attack from David. More than likely, they thought, well, they're going to be so distraught, they're not going to come after us this quick. Well, the battle that ensued took place over a 24-hour period, and in that time frame, every single Amalekite, with the exception of 400. There were 400 that were able to slip away. They got on camels and they were able to get away from the battle. But every other Amalekite was destroyed. But not a single one of the wives or the children of David's men were harmed. They were able to recover each and every one of them. So folks, you can imagine at this point, what is David to his men? He is a hero. He is a hero. Well, they head back toward Brook Besor. When they get close to the place, the 200 men who had stayed behind, they saw them coming. They were excited. They ran out. They were reunited with their families. Think about the joy of that occasion. The celebration and the rejoicing that took place, but it was very short-lived. Because there were a number of those men that had gone with David into battle who were greedy. There were a number of those men who wanted to retain all of the spoils of the battle for themselves. And so they said, we're not going to give these 200 men any of the spoils of battle. Yeah, they can have their wives, they can have their children, and they can get out of here. But we're not giving them any of the spoils of battle. We're keeping all that for ourselves. David said, I don't think so. He said, folks, it's not going to work that way. But we can kind of understand where those men were coming from, can't we? After all, these were the men that put in the work. These were the men who went into battle, who put their lives at risk. Why should they share the spoils with those who stayed behind? Well, the scene was now set for David to have a wonderful teaching opportunity. Should the strong share with the weak? Should the rich support those who are poor? And ultimately what it was going to come down to was this. What was Brook Basor going to be remembered as? Was Brook Basor going to be remembered as a place of compassion or a place of contempt? Would it be remembered as a place of grace or a place of greed? Or would it be remembered as a place of sharing or a place of selfishness? Well, David told his men, he said, that behavior is not going to work. He said, we're not going to handle it this way. He says, no, this place is going to be a place of compassion, of grace, and of sharing. And he established a statute and an ordinance on that day that from that day forward, that was going to be the accepted law of those people. And that law was going to be that those who served in the heat of battle would share equally with those who stayed behind. The strong would share with the weak. You know, if we turn over in 2 Samuel chapter 8 and verse 15, we find a summary of David's life. And in this summary, it says that he established righteousness and justice in Israel. And most Bible students agree that this all began with this decision that he made at Brook Basor. What he established that day became the law of the land in Israel. But the question that arises is, why did he tell them this? Why is this the conclusion that he came to? Well, if you look at verse 33, he gives us 3 reasons why. First, he says, guys, it wasn't you 400 that won the battle. He said, God is the one that won the battle. He said, and also, he said, the fact that your life was spared, that should be gift enough. And number 3, he said, because the nature of God dictates that the strong provide for the weak. He said, for those 3 reasons, he said, this is going to be the standard. Well, while this became the accepted standard for the Israelites, it was a standard they continued to struggle with. They continued to battle against from time to time. It's one that we still struggle with many times today. How many times do either we ourselves have this mentality or see others display the mentality, well, I worked hard for my money, so why should I share my money with the weak? Or I took a risk and it paid off. Why should I share in those profits? Or I worked long, hard hours to earn my money. Why do I have to share with others? Why would I just give it away? Or the one that we hear so prominently in our society today, if they would just get out and get a job like I have and work as hard as I work, then they could earn their own money and they wouldn't need my money. How often do we hear those kinds of things? We hear it a lot, don't we? Well, oftentimes we feel like if we can come up with enough excuses or enough deflections that the issue's just going to go away. They'll go and they'll get help from somebody else, and then I won't have to feel bad about not helping them. I've deflected, I've excused the situation. Well, folks, what we need to understand, and we've seen this throughout history, there are always going to be people who are underprivileged. There are always going to be people who, due to health concerns, are unable to fully support themselves. There are always going to be those also who are working behind the scenes, who are seen as less important than those who are out in the forefront. And oftentimes they're seen as being less significant or not as worthy of receiving blessings as others are. But David's message to his men rang true to them, and it rings just as true to us today. And this is a message that we all need to hear, to accept, and to follow. And that is that in the eyes of God, everyone's equal. Regardless of our social status, regardless of how much money we have in the bank, regardless of how important we're seen in our society, in the eyes of God, everybody's equal. We think about those men of David. Those 400 that went into battle, yes, they were important. They carried out that task. But those 200 that stayed behind, they were just as important to God. They were just as significant. They were just as worthy of support as those who had actually gone into battle. But ultimately, what we see in this example, we see, folks, God is the one who makes the strong strong. God makes the strong strong. Every good and perfect gift that we receive comes from God, and God is the one who is preserving our health, preserving our life, preserving the abilities that we have. And so with those things in mind, we need to come to the realization that one day too, you and I will come to our own Brook Basor. We too will face this type of situation. And life is always going to divide us, either into those who are in battle or those who are behind the scenes. Folks, not everyone can be on the front lines. Not everyone has the same abilities. Not everyone has the strength, has the vitality that others do. There are others who are weak, who are tired, who are injured, those who remain off sides. But behind it all, God demands that the strong provide for the weak. Now, I know we're just about out of time, but just briefly, I want to share just a few pointers with you, just a few things to keep in mind whenever we face these types of situations. Folks, we first need to recognize that we all have been, are, or will be in the position of the weak. Now, while there are exceptions, most people come into this life with nothing. They come into this life in a very weak and poor situation, and oftentimes, until we grow, we mature, we get established in our career or whatever course of life is that we take, oftentimes we do depend upon the support of others, don't we? We depend upon our parents. We depend upon our friends. We depend upon our brothers and sisters in Christ to help us along. But we need to always remember those times that people were good to us, provided for us. We should use that as a motivation to provide for others in the same way. But also, we all need to keep in mind that while today we may be strong, each and every one of us, folks, we are only one illness, one injury, one job loss, one bad investment, and the like, away from becoming the weak. That realization should humble us. And it should cause us to want to help those in need. Number 2, we need to do for others what has been done for us. This goes hand in hand with what we just looked at. When we think back to those times that kindness and generosity has been shown to us, that should motivate us to want to help others in the same way. Number 3, we need to be a voice for the silent. Folks, we do not do this nearly enough in the church. We need to be a voice for the silent. Folks, there will always be those who either through pride, through shame, or merely just the lack of knowledge of who to turn to or where to turn to, who remain in a poor and helpless situation when help is available. When help is only a request away. Folks, when we see someone or we know someone who is struggling in some way, we need to be a voice for that person. We need to be an advocate for them and help them get the blessings that they need. But also, we need to be willing to share the blessings that we have received. when we come to realize that every blessing that we have has been granted to us by God, then it will be easier for us to turn loose of some of those things. It will be easier for us to have a willingness to share with others and help others. Because really, when it comes down to it, doesn't everything belong to God? Yes, you know what? Our name may be on our bank account. Our name may be on the investments we have. Our name may be on the deed to our house or to the land that we own. It may be on the title to our vehicles. Our name may be on many things. But our mentality must always be, God is the owner, and He has entrusted us as the steward of those things. And we need to be using the things that we have been blessed with to assist those who are weak. We also need to use the influence that we have. Probably all of us have those in life that, we would call connections. We have certain connections. We have certain acquaintances. And probably all of us have brethren, have friends, have family members, and the like, who work in a variety of different fields, who have a variety of different skill sets. We need to use the influence that we have through our friends, through our connections, to connect those individuals that can best help with the needs of others. But here's what I want to end with. I had a little bit more that I wanted to discuss, but I think this is a good stopping point. When we go back into the Hebrew and we look at the meaning of this term Besor, did you know that word literally means gospel? Gospel. And is it not true that the gospel is where the victor shares equally the spoils of battle? Think about that for just a moment. When we think about the gospel, folks, Jesus is the strong one. Jesus, the strong, He fought the battle, and through His death, He shares the blessings of the gospel with us, the weak. He shares that with us. Folks, when we come to our Brook Besor, we must understand that the strong must provide for the weak. In doing so, we will leave a powerful display of the kind of love and the kind of blessing that Christ has provided for us in the gospel. Him being strong provided a blessing to us, the weak. When we are strong, we provide a blessing to those who are weak through the assistance that we give to them. We show the kind of love and care and support that Christ has extended to us in His death on the cross. We show that kind of good, godly love and care to those who are weak. Folks, this is what God expects of us. But remember, I mentioned this earlier in the lesson, but remember, there will always be those who are underprivileged. There will always be those who, due to their health, they're not able to fully support themselves. And there will always be those who are working behind the scenes. There will always be those who are seen by society as less important. But we must remember that we are all equal in the sight of God. We need to look to the example of David at Brook Besor, but also to the words of Paul in Galatians 6 and verse 10. Because our desire should always be, as we therefore have opportunity, let us do good unto all men, but especially unto them who are of the household of faith. Now there may be someone here today that when you examine yourself, you say, Josh, I'm the weak that you're talking about. I'm struggling. I'm really going through a hard time in my life. Have you made that known to anyone? Have you let your brothers and sisters know the trials and the hardships that you're going through so that we can be there for you, to encourage you, to help you, be it of a physical nature, spiritual nature, whatever the case may be? Have you made that known? Because you are among people today who love you and who want to help, who want to build you up, to aid you in those difficult times. If it's a spiritual weakness that you're facing, please make that known. We would love to study with you and encourage you, to help you in getting your life right with God, to helping you grow and mature in your faith. If you've never obeyed the gospel, then we encourage you today to make that step. If you believe that Jesus is the Son of God, repent of your sins, confess that faith you have in Him, and be baptized. Have those sins washed away. But remember, just as Christ, as our strong victor, has shared the spoils of His victory, and He has done that through salvation. He has made that available to every one of us in our weak and sinful state. God showed His love for us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. We need to follow that example. Be there for those who are weak. This morning, if you examine yourself, and there's a spiritual need in your life that we can assist you with, we encourage you to come forward and make that known at this time while together we stand and sing.